help. They're coming. Ethan Blackwood's voice echoed through the marble lobby, a desperate plea swallowed by the grandeur of the chandelier-lit space. He stumbled over the polished floor, the tailored black suit clinging to his broad shoulders as he scanned for any sign of safety. Across the room, Lila Johnson moved with quiet purpose, her dark skin catching the soft glow of the crystal light, every step measured, hands adjusting the tray of silverware she had just polished. She had been working here for 3 months, invisible yet acutely aware of every sound, every shadow, every whisper of movement. Ethan's eyes locked on her, disbelief flashing through the icy blue depths, his usual composure shattered by the urgency in his own voice. The grand clock above the entrance ticked steadily, each second stretching longer than the last, as Lila instinctively noticed a shift in the energy around the guests, a tension that hadn't been there before. Her gaze flicked toward the mirrored walls, analyzing angles and exits, calculating distance and potential reactions, the kind of split-second thinking that came from years of navigating difficult spaces with nothing but observation as her guide. Ethan's words repeated in her mind, fragmented and desperate, and without a second thought she began to move, weaving between tables and guests with an almost choreographed grace, the faint click of her polished shoes muffled by the thick carpet. Every detail mattered, the way the light hit the corners of the room, the subtle reflections in the glass panels, the precise positioning of chairs and tables, and she used it all to her advantage, forming an invisible shield between Ethan and the unseen pressure closing in. From his perspective, time seemed to slow, each moment drawn out, heart pounding like a drum against his chest, yet within that drawn-out reality, Lila's calm, deliberate motions cut through the chaos, creating a sense of order he hadn't realized he craved. She paused just long enough to signal subtly to the nearest staff member, eyes meeting his briefly with unspoken instructions, a flicker of understanding passing between them without words, and then she continued. Leading with both caution and courage, the room itself feeling both vast and intimate in the way it framed their small but critical movements. Guests continued their conversations, unaware, their laughter and chatter a distant hum that made the tension between Ethan and the unfolding situation all the more pronounced. The air seemed heavier near the entrance, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and candle wax, underscoring the meticulous environment that had become the stage for this sudden urgency. Lila's mind raced, matching Ethan's fear with an unyielding focus, calculating the shortest route to a secure position without drawing attention, each step deliberate yet fluid, a dance between invisibility and intervention. As Ethan took a cautious breath, steadying his nerves, he watched her approach, a strange mixture of awe and relief flashing across his features, the realization that this small, unassuming figure held a presence capable of shifting the balance of the room and the moment itself. And in that suspended second, before any action could be taken, the grandeur of the lobby, the muted sparkle of the chandeliers, and the murmurs of the unaware guests all framed the quiet heroism of a waitress who had silently decided to act, whose poise and readiness defied the urgency, and whose choices in the next heartbeat would shape everything that followed. Lila Johnson moved silently through the expansive lobby, her steps measured and precise, every muscle alert to the slightest shift in the polished marble environment. She had learned quickly over the past 3 months to read the rhythm of the space, noticing how the reflections from the crystal chandeliers could hide or reveal movement, how the thick carpet softened the sound of her footsteps yet carried enough vibration to sense proximity. As she passed a line of potted plants, she allowed her eyes to trace every possible exit, every angle that could offer cover or a route to safety, calculating distance and timing with a calm focus that belied the tension building around Ethan Blackwood. Her hands adjusted the tray she carried, a practiced motion that kept her mind busy and her body steady, her fingers brushing over the silverware in a tactile rhythm that grounded her. Ethan remained near the center of the room, pale from stress, but his gaze never wavered from hers, watching her deliberate movement with a mixture of astonishment and trust. Lila's dark eyes flicked to the reception desk where a small cluster of staff were now frozen mid-task, uncertain of the unusual energy spreading through the air, their confusion unnoticed by the surrounding guests who continued their conversations, the sound a dull murmur that framed the tension like a distant storm. She stepped toward the edge of the seating area, maintaining a balance between visibility and discretion, her posture relaxed but alert, aware that every gesture and shift could influence the perception of those nearby. Her mind catalogued details instinctively: the angle of a chair, the distance between a table and the nearest column, the way a sunbeam cut across the marble floor, and she integrated each observation into a mental map, a navigation guide for the next series of precise movements. Ethan's breath came in shallow, uneven pulls, his pulse visible beneath the crisp fabric of his tailored jacket, and yet the sight of Lila moving with such quiet confidence began to draw a sense of reassurance through him, a recognition that even in the midst of uncertainty, some measure of control could be regained. As she reached the far side of the room, she paused for a fraction of a second, assessing the positions of staff and guests, then subtly signaled to the nearest waiter, a flick of her wrist and a tilt of her head, conveying a message without words, a shared understanding that actions needed to be synchronized. The staff member responded with a slight nod, stepping into motion with unobtrusive precision, further amplifying Lila's influence over the flow of activity within the space. Ethan allowed himself to take a measured breath, his attention still anchored on her, realizing that her awareness, her composed decisiveness, and her silent command over the environment were already shaping the outcome before any overt action had been taken. In that moment, the lobby transformed in his perception, from a place of looming threat to a controlled stage where Lila's careful observation and tactical grace set the stage for what could be accomplished, demonstrating the unexpected power of someone who moved with purpose, clarity, and courage in a world where appearances could be deceiving and quiet determination spoke louder than any command. Lila Johnson's eyes scanned the room one more time, noting the subtle shifts in light and shadow as the sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long patterns across the polished marble floor. She adjusted the tray she carried, her fingers tracing the edges of the silverware in a familiar, grounding motion, keeping her focus razor-sharp despite the tension around Ethan Blackwood. The guests were still oblivious, chatting softly and laughing at distant tables, their attention drawn to the menus and the delicate clink of glasses, creating a background hum that contrasted with the sharp awareness of the two figures at the center of the lobby. Lila moved with purpose, positioning herself strategically between Ethan and the nearest exit, ready to guide him with silent precision if needed, her posture relaxed but every sense alert. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on her, a mixture of awe and cautious hope reflecting in his icy blue eyes, noticing how she subtly used the environment to create pathways and barriers, how she anticipated every possible movement within the space without a word spoken. The polished surfaces of the reception desk reflected fragments of the scene, allowing Lila to gauge angles and plan her next steps, her mind mapping out a route that would ensure safety while maintaining the illusion of calm to the surrounding guests. Every detail mattered: the placement of chairs, the distance between tables, the flow of foot traffic, and she integrated each observation seamlessly into her plan, adjusting on the fly as Ethan shifted slightly in his stance, his breath uneven but steadying with the reassurance of her composed presence. Lila's internal calculations blended with instinct, her awareness heightened by every subtle sound, every flicker of movement in the periphery, the faint rustle of a coat or the soft tap of heels across the floor. Ethan felt a rare sense of clarity amid the uncertainty, his attention drawn to her deliberate motions, the calm authority in her posture, and the quiet command she exerted over the room without needing to speak. As she reached the edge of the seating area, her eyes flicked toward the cluster of staff near the bar, their expressions momentarily registering confusion and curiosity before they settled into the rhythm of coordinated assistance she had silently established. The lobby, in all its grandeur, became a carefully orchestrated stage, with Lila at the center of the silent choreography, guiding movement, controlling sightlines, and ensuring that Ethan remained shielded from any potential chaos. Every calculated step, every glance and gesture, worked in harmony to create a controlled environment where composure and strategy outweighed panic, turning a moment of potential uncertainty into one of quiet, unspoken control. Ethan's shoulders eased slightly, tension easing in small increments as he watched her actions, the realization dawning that in her calm decisiveness and unwavering focus, she held a power that transformed the dynamics of the room, proving that presence, observation, and courage could shape outcomes as effectively as any visible authority. Lila Johnson paused for a fraction of a second, her gaze sweeping across the room as she evaluated the subtle shift in Ethan Blackwood's posture, noticing the tension in his shoulders and the faint tightening of his jaw, evidence of the stress that had been building since the moment he entered the lobby. She adjusted her stance slightly, ensuring that her body subtly created a buffer, a protective presence that allowed him to regain a sense of composure without drawing attention from the other guests whose conversations and movements continued around them, oblivious to the heightened awareness in the center of the space. Each careful step she took was deliberate, balancing the weight of her own awareness with the need to maintain the illusion of normalcy, her dark eyes scanning every reflective surface and shadowed corner for anything that might affect their path or the flow of the room. Ethan's gaze followed her, noting the calm efficiency with which she moved, her hands steady as they brushed over the tray of silverware and glassware, her motions unhurried yet precise, a choreography born of experience and an acute sense of timing. The soft hum of conversation and the distant clinking of glasses created a backdrop that emphasized the contrast between the composed, methodical approach of Lila and the internal storm of urgency Ethan felt, each inhale and exhale a reminder of the stakes, yet softened by the quiet assurance her presence brought. She reached the edge of the reception area, subtly guiding Ethan toward a slightly less congested pathway, her eyes briefly meeting his with a look that conveyed both understanding and reassurance, signaling that the next move would require careful attention but that he was not alone in navigating the uncertainty. The polished marble reflected shards of light from the crystal chandeliers above, creating patterns that Lila used to anticipate sightlines and movements, adjusting her trajectory to maintain both visibility and cover, ensuring that every step forward was safe and deliberate. Ethan felt a shift within himself, a mixture of relief and cautious admiration as he observed her, recognizing not just her skill but the confidence that radiated from her every gesture, transforming what could have been chaos into a manageable flow of action. Lila continued to move with subtlety, coordinating with the staff through minimal gestures and eye contact, creating an unspoken rhythm that allowed Ethan to follow her lead without needing verbal cues, the efficiency of her planning evident in the smoothness of the transitions between spaces. Every detail, from the angle of her head to the timing of her movements, contributed to a controlled environment where the unexpected became manageable and the tension was mitigated by the precision of her actions. As they navigated further across the lobby, the combination of her calm presence, strategic awareness, and the steadying effect she had on Ethan allowed for a seamless passage through the space, demonstrating the power of composure and thoughtful action in shaping outcomes even in the most uncertain moments. Lila Johnson reached the central corridor of the lobby, her movements deliberate as she guided Ethan Blackwood toward a slightly less crowded section near the grand staircase, her eyes continuously scanning for any subtle shifts in the patterns of the guests and staff, noting how shadows fell across the marble floor and how reflections in the large glass panels could reveal or obscure their positions. She adjusted her tray, fingers brushing the edges of the polished silverware with practiced precision, maintaining a rhythm that grounded her focus while signaling quiet control over the space around her. Ethan followed closely, every step measured and cautious, his breath steadying slightly as he took in her composed demeanor, realizing that her calmness was infectious, influencing the environment in ways he could scarcely articulate. The soft murmur of conversations, the distant clink of glassware, and the gentle hum of air conditioning combined to create an ambient backdrop, highlighting the contrast between the seemingly ordinary room and the heightened awareness of the two at its center. Lila subtly positioned herself to create a natural barrier, an invisible line that directed attention away from Ethan without disrupting the flow of movement for the other guests, her dark eyes sweeping the room with an acute awareness that allowed her to anticipate potential obstacles and navigate them smoothly. Each of her gestures was precise yet understated, a balance between visibility and discretion, ensuring that she could act quickly if needed while remaining unnoticed by anyone not directly involved in their path. Ethan observed the way she used the reflective surfaces to her advantage, glancing at polished tables and mirrored panels to gauge sightlines and adjust positions accordingly, and he felt a growing sense of confidence that the situation was under her silent command. The subtle coordination with other staff members was seamless, communicated through small glances and minimal gestures that conveyed instructions without words, a shared understanding that required no explanation but ensured synchronization. Across the lobby, Lila's presence brought a sense of order and reassurance, transforming the corridor from a space of potential uncertainty into a controlled environment where careful observation and deliberate action could shape the outcome. Ethan's awareness shifted, noticing the details he had previously overlooked, the precise alignment of furniture, the soft lighting highlighting textures, the gentle movement of curtains as the air circulated, and understanding that each of these elements contributed to the safe passage she orchestrated. As they advanced, the combination of her quiet authority, tactical awareness, and unshakable composure allowed Ethan to regain his own sense of stability, appreciating the subtle power in her ability to influence the room without force, to navigate complexity through thoughtfulness and poise. The lobby, with its expansive space and elegant design, became a canvas for her strategic movements, demonstrating how observation, planning, and courage could shift dynamics and create a path forward that seemed both natural and extraordinary, leaving Ethan increasingly reliant on her guidance and fully aware of the remarkable presence she brought into every step they took together. Lila Johnson paused for a calculated moment at the top of the grand staircase, her dark eyes scanning the final stretch of the lobby, noting the subtle shifts in light as the late afternoon sun angled through the tall windows, casting elongated patterns across the polished marble. She adjusted the tray she carried, the faint clink of silverware providing a rhythm that anchored her movements as she directed Ethan Blackwood with a slight tilt of her head, a silent signal for him to follow her toward a safer position near the rear of the lobby. Ethan moved with careful steps, relying on the calm assurance that radiated from her every gesture, the tension in his shoulders easing incrementally as he observed the deliberate precision with which she navigated the space. Lila's mind catalogued every reflective surface, every shadow cast by the ornate columns, and every subtle motion of the guests who remained unaware of the heightened awareness that defined the two figures at the center of the room. Her movements were fluid yet purposeful, a balance of subtlety and authority that guided Ethan seamlessly, ensuring that each step forward was measured and controlled without drawing undue attention. Ethan's eyes followed her, noting how she adjusted her posture to create protective spacing, how her gaze remained alert yet composed, and how her presence alone seemed to instill a sense of order in the environment. The muted hum of conversations, the soft clatter of glassware, and the distant murmur of the grand chandelier swaying slightly created a backdrop that highlighted the intensity of the moment, contrasting the composed elegance of Lila's movements with the heightened awareness coursing through Ethan. She briefly signaled another staff member with a subtle nod, their understanding immediate, reinforcing the silent coordination that allowed the two of them to navigate the remaining distance efficiently. Every decision, every calculated pause, contributed to a sense of momentum, a controlled progression that guided Ethan toward a position where the potential for disruption was minimized. Lila's steadying influence, her careful orchestration of both movement and observation, created a dynamic in which Ethan could regain composure, the confidence in her strategy allowing him to breathe with a newfound steadiness. The polished surfaces, the warm light, and the ambient sounds of the lobby framed their movement like a carefully composed scene, each element reinforcing the clarity and control she brought to the situation. As they reached the edge of the corridor near the rear exit, Ethan's awareness of Lila's skill and composure crystallized, his reliance on her guidance complete, and the space around them seemed to settle into the rhythm she had established, demonstrating the remarkable impact of observation, planning, and quiet determination on the unfolding events. Lila Johnson finally guided Ethan Blackwood to a small alcove near the rear of the lobby, a spot partially shielded by a cluster of potted plants and a decorative screen, providing a temporary sense of security as they paused to assess the situation. Ethan's breathing slowed, his hands unclenching slightly from the tension that had gripped him, and he took a moment to observe Lila's calm expression, noting the subtle confidence that radiated from her posture and the deliberate way she balanced awareness with composure. The soft golden light from the chandeliers above highlighted the meticulous details of the lobby, the polished marble reflecting their forms and the quiet elegance of the surroundings, contrasting with the heightened alertness coursing through their veins. Lila adjusted her tray again, fingers brushing over the silverware and glassware as if to maintain a tactile rhythm, grounding herself and reinforcing the quiet authority she held over the unfolding events. Ethan's gaze followed her every movement, his appreciation growing as he noticed the seamless way she coordinated with the staff through subtle gestures and brief eye contact, ensuring the room remained under control without drawing unnecessary attention. Guests continued their conversations, oblivious to the tension near the rear exit, their laughter and chatter forming a muted backdrop that accentuated the focused stillness between Lila and Ethan. She moved slightly forward, creating a natural barrier while subtly signaling a staff member to adjust a chair and guide a few guests away, her actions executed with precision and grace, reinforcing the impression of control and order. Ethan allowed himself to relax further, his awareness anchored by her movements, the reliability of her presence instilling a sense of calm he had not felt since arriving in the lobby. The combination of her measured pace, vigilant observation, and unspoken coordination with the team provided a clear path forward, a sense of momentum that was both reassuring and empowering. Every element in the space, the reflective surfaces, the soft hum of conversation, the warm glow of the lighting, interacted with her movements, creating an environment where precision and thoughtfulness dictated the flow rather than uncertainty or panic. Ethan's confidence grew incrementally with each careful step, the reassurance in Lila's demeanor guiding him toward the sense of stability he needed to navigate the remainder of the lobby. The subtle choreography of their movement, invisible to those around them, demonstrated the impact of keen observation, deliberate action, and composed decisiveness, transforming what could have been a chaotic moment into a series of controlled, confident steps that set the stage for what would follow. Lila's influence over the environment, the synchronization with staff, and the careful timing of each gesture underscored the quiet heroism she displayed, proving that thoughtful courage and strategic awareness could shape the outcome of a tense situation with clarity and effectiveness. Lila Johnson allowed herself a brief but precise moment to observe the subtle shifts unfolding within the lobby as Ethan Blackwood followed just behind her, his presence steady yet attentive, the polished marble beneath their feet reflecting fragmented images of their movement through the soft, refracted glow of chandeliers suspended high above, their light breaking across the surface in delicate patterns that seemed almost alive. She registered everything at once without appearing to focus on anything in particular, the quiet persistence of conversation weaving through the air, the low mechanical hum of the ventilation system, the intermittent, almost musical clink of glassware meeting porcelain or silver, all combining into a continuous ambient rhythm that formed the perfect cover, a soundscape where deliberate action could dissolve into normalcy if executed with precision. Her dark eyes moved calmly across the final stretch leading to the rear exit, cataloging positions with instinctive efficiency, the distance between tables, the subtle angles of chairs, the posture and orientation of each guest and staff member, the shifting interplay between light and shadow that revealed more through reflection than direct observation, every detail processed and placed into a mental structure that guided her next move. Ethan felt the shift within himself almost immediately, his posture loosening as he tuned into her pace, his earlier tension dissolving into something steadier, more grounded, the confidence in her movements transferring into him through silent synchronization, each step he took becoming more deliberate, more aligned with her rhythm as though he were being guided by an unseen current. Lila's hands moved lightly over the tray she carried, her fingers brushing the glassware and silverware with controlled familiarity, each small adjustment not just maintaining appearance but reinforcing her internal focus, anchoring her awareness while her attention extended outward, mapping every reflective surface, the polished columns, mirrored panels, even the faint sheen of window glass, using them to monitor angles beyond direct sight, ensuring that no movement occurred without her awareness, with the slightest tilt of her head, subtle enough to be mistaken for a natural shift of posture, she signaled a staff member stationed near the reception desk, and the response was immediate yet nearly invisible. The staff member adjusted a chair by a fraction, redirected a guest with a courteous gesture toward a quieter corner, and in doing so, preserved the fluid pathway Lila had already calculated, maintaining the illusion of uninterrupted normalcy. The warm afternoon light streamed through the tall windows in elongated beams, stretching across the marble floor and highlighting the elegant architecture, the refined environment enhancing rather than distracting from Lila's control, each illuminated detail serving as a reference point within the system she maintained. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on her, not out of dependence alone but out of growing recognition, noticing the subtle strategies embedded within her actions, the way she positioned herself relative to light sources, how she used shadows to soften visibility, how every movement minimized exposure while advancing their path forward, transforming what could have been a vulnerable passage into a controlled progression. The lobby itself seemed to respond to her presence. Its expansive layout and intricate design no longer overwhelming but structured, its complexity reduced into manageable sequences through her observation and foresight, each step they took reinforcing the sense that nothing within this environment was left to chance. The ambient sounds continued to flow around them, soft laughter from a distant cluster of guests, the muted shuffle of footsteps crossing carpeted sections, the gentle rustle of fabric as someone adjusted their seat, these sounds no longer distractions but elements within the rhythm she utilized, masking their movement while providing a constant baseline of normal activity. Ethan felt clarity settle more deeply with every passing moment. His trust in Lila no longer something he consciously evaluated but something that existed. Naturally, instinctively, his awareness attuned to the smallest cues she provided, a slight change in pace, a subtle shift in direction, the angle of her shoulders, each signal guiding him without interruption. As they moved closer to the final section before the exit, her influence over the space became increasingly evident, the pathway ahead subtly shaped through coordinated adjustments, the positions of people and objects aligning in a way that created a clear and unobstructed route without ever appearing orchestrated. Her composure never wavered, her expression neutral yet focused, her presence both unassuming and absolute, demonstrating a level of control that did not rely on authority but on precision, awareness, and timing. Ethan recognized in that moment that what she was doing extended beyond simple navigation. It was the deliberate shaping of outcome through observation and calculated action, a process so refined it appeared effortless yet carried the weight of constant decision-making. The final stretch opened before them, the rear exit now within reach, framed by softer light and a quieter atmosphere that marked the transition from complexity to simplicity. Yet even here Lila's attention did not falter, her awareness expanding to ensure continuity beyond the threshold. Ethan followed without hesitation, his movements confident, his breathing steady, fully aligned with the rhythm she had established, understanding that every step taken thus far had been part of a larger, carefully constructed sequence. The elegance of the lobby remained unchanged to any outside observer, its guests still engaged in conversation, its atmosphere still calm and refined, but beneath that surface lay the quiet imprint of Lila's influence, a subtle reordering of movement and space that had allowed them to pass through without disruption. As they approached the exit, Ethan felt a profound sense of trust solidify within him, not just in her ability to guide but in her capacity to transform uncertainty into control, to turn a complex, high-stakes environment into a series of manageable decisions executed with flawless precision. The final steps carried them forward, each one reinforcing the silent partnership that had formed between them, a shared understanding built not through words but through movement, awareness, and timing. And in that moment, as the ambient sounds continued to flow and the light continued to shift across the marble floor, the true nature of Lila's strength became unmistakable, not loud, not visible, but deeply present, a quiet force that shaped outcomes with grace, discipline, and unwavering focus, proving that in a world of constant motion and hidden variables, it was the most composed and attentive presence that held the greatest power. Lila Johnson finally reached the far edge of the lobby where the rear exit opened into a quieter, more controlled corridor, her movement never hurried yet never uncertain, each step placed with deliberate precision that seemed to shape the space around her rather than simply move through it. And behind her Ethan Blackwood followed, his pace aligning instinctively with hers. Guided not by instruction but by the quiet authority she carried in every motion, the afternoon light poured through the tall windows in long, golden sheets, stretching across the polished marble floor and breaking into soft reflections that shimmered with each subtle shift of movement, catching briefly in Ethan's pale blue eyes as he watched her, his awareness sharpening even as his tension eased, the contrast between the earlier uncertainty and the present calm settling into him like a slow, steady breath. Lila paused for the briefest fraction of a second, not enough to disrupt rhythm but enough to observe, her gaze sweeping the environment with controlled precision, mapping positions, distances, intentions. The remaining guests scattered across the space, the staff moving in practiced routines, the reflections in glass panels and polished columns revealing angles that direct sight alone could not capture, and beneath it all the ambient soundscape continued, soft conversation layered with the delicate clink of glassware, footsteps muted by distance, the quiet hum of a living space unaware of the subtle orchestration unfolding within it. Ethan's attention remained fixed on her, not out of uncertainty but because of the undeniable sense of control she projected, the way her posture dictated direction without command, the way her timing created openings where none had existed moments before, turning a crowded, unpredictable environment into something structured, navigable, almost cooperative. She adjusted the tray in her hands, fingers brushing lightly across the silverware in a steady, grounding rhythm. An action so ordinary it disappeared into the background, yet within it was a deliberate centering, a tactile reinforcement of focus that allowed her awareness to extend outward without fracture, touching every reflective surface, every shadowed edge, every shifting line of movement that crossed their path. With the smallest tilt of her head, almost imperceptible, she signaled a nearby staff member, and the response unfolded seamlessly, a chair repositioned by inches, a guest gently redirected under the guise of courtesy, a pathway subtly widened without drawing attention, the environment itself bending in quiet compliance to her intent. Ethan drew a deeper breath, feeling clarity settle where tension had once lingered, recognizing that what he had perceived as randomness had been quietly reorganized into order, every potential disruption softened, every unpredictable element accounted for before it could emerge. The interplay of light across the marble floor and mirrored surfaces enhanced the elegance of the lobby, but to Ethan it revealed something more profound. The depth of Lila's awareness, her ability to read not just what was visible, but what was possible, to anticipate movement before it occurred and shape it into alignment with her objective, as they advanced toward the final stretch leading to the rear exit. Her influence became increasingly apparent, not as dominance but as a guiding structure, invisible yet absolute, allowing Ethan to move with growing assurance, his steps no longer tentative but purposeful, his path defined not by destination alone but by the precision of her orchestration, the arrangement of furniture, the gentle sway of curtains stirred by faint currents of air, the muted reflections shifting across polished surfaces, all of it formed a cohesive flow that carried them forward, each element contributing to a continuity that felt both natural and meticulously constructed. Ethan realized that his reliance on her had shifted from conscious trust to instinctive alignment, a quiet surrender to the certainty she embodied, understanding now that her strength lay not in force but in perception, not in control through dominance but in control through awareness, strategy, and composure. The expansive architecture of the lobby, with its high ceilings and intricate detailing, no longer felt overwhelming but instead structured, its complexity resolved into a series of manageable pathways under her guidance, each visual detail becoming a marker within a system she had already mapped and mastered. The ambient sounds remained steady, distant laughter, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional echo of footsteps, but now they blended into a soothing cadence that reinforced the stability of the moment, a stark contrast to the tension that had defined their earlier movement through the space. As they approached the threshold of the rear corridor, Lila's posture shifted by the slightest degree, a near-invisible release of tension that signaled transition rather than completion, her awareness expanding outward once more to encompass the space beyond, ensuring continuity, ensuring safety even as the immediate complexity faded. Ethan followed without hesitation, his breathing even, his senses still alert yet no longer strained, carrying with him the imprint of her guidance, the memory of each precise adjustment that had brought them here. The corridor ahead appeared quieter, its lighting softer, its structure simpler, yet the significance of reaching it was not lost on him. It marked the culmination of a sequence that had required constant awareness, constant decision-making, constant control exercised without display. He allowed himself a brief glance toward Lila, noting the calm that still defined her, the unwavering composure that had not faltered once, and in that moment a deeper realization settled within him, not just admiration, but understanding, the recognition of a skill set so refined it transcended ordinary perception, transforming complexity into clarity, uncertainty into structure, and potential danger into controlled passage. The lobby behind them continued unchanged, its guests unaware, its rhythm uninterrupted, yet for Ethan it had become something entirely different, a space reshaped by invisible hands, by decisions made in silence, by a presence that required no acknowledgement to be absolute. As they moved fully into the corridor, the light shifting, the sounds softening, the environment simplifying, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude, not spoken but deeply understood, carried in the steadiness of his movement and the trust in his gaze, knowing that what he had witnessed was not merely guidance, but mastery. Lila Johnson's ability to navigate not just space, but possibility itself, shaping outcomes with precision, grace, and an unwavering calm that left no trace yet altered everything. And in that quiet transition, as the complexity of the lobby gave way to the simplicity of the corridor, the journey reached a point of resolution, not marked by relief alone, but by the recognition of something far more enduring, the silent bond forged through shared awareness, the understanding that control did not need to be seen to be real, and the certainty that in the most uncertain of circumstances, it was the quietest presence that held the greatest power.